A struggling mechanic repaired a billionaire's jet. Seconds later, she asked him to marry her. If Clayton Reese had known that one phone call could flip his entire life upside down, maybe he would have let it ring a few more times. Maybe he would have let it ring out, stayed under the warmth of his threadbare quilt, listening to the old clock ticking its slow heartbeat across the room. But he didn't. At 3 a.m, when the world outside his window lay frozen and silent, Clayton sat up, rubbed his face with rough palms, and answered, "Reese, we need you at Westfield Private Airstrip, now, urgent." The voice wasn't one he recognized. Sharp, pressed for time. No details offered. No room for questions. Just a name. Delaney Carter. The Delaney Carter. Owner of Carter Aviation. The woman whose face appeared on business magazines Clayton never bought, but sometimes glimpsed in the checkout lines. Before he could process it, he was already hauling on his boots. He had no illusions about why they were calling him. Some backwater mechanic who spent his days fixing crop dusters and battered old Cessnas. Probably every other fancy technician had refused to get out of bed for a nobody's fee. But that didn't matter. He worked because machines spoke to him in ways people never had. The air was cold enough to bite skin as he drove, headlights carving a lonely tunnel through the mist. Westfield Private Airstrip was about a 40-minute drive from his shack of a home, but Clayton made it in 35 without thinking about the speedometer. When he pulled up to the sprawling hangars, security waved him through after a perfunctory check. They were expecting him. Past rows of sleek, glinting aircraft, a single Gulfstream sat under harsh lights, its nose slightly tilted down, like a bird with a broken neck. And standing nearby, half shivering in their tailored coats, was a group of people who clearly didn't belong anywhere near a toolbox. "Well, that's him," one of them said too loudly, not bothering to hide the skepticism. Clayton kept his head down. He was used to looks. The ones that measured him by his worn jeans, his oil-stained jacket, his calloused hands. He didn't need their approval. A tall man with silver hair and a stiff suit approached. "Name?" he asked briskly. "Clayton Reese. You're the one Harris recommended?" "Yes." The man looked him over like he was inspecting a dented part. "We need this aircraft cleared to fly in 3 hours. Carter's personal jet. She's got a board meeting in another city at sunrise. You understand the stakes?" Clayton nodded. The man handed him a clipboard. "Checklist's here. Stick to it. No freelance diagnostics. If you see something outside of protocol, note it down and let the in-house team handle it. Meaning, don't embarrass us by pretending you know better." Clayton took the clipboard. His fingers brushed a tiny smear of oil on the side. Familiar. Grounding. Without a word, he climbed the steps into the aircraft. Inside, the plane smelled faintly of leather and polished wood. Perfect. Immaculate. Expensive in the way only things that were never truly touched could be. He set to work. The checklist was standard. Hydraulics, avionics, landing gear, fuel system, quick scans, surface-level inspections. Enough to slap a sticker on the plane and send it into the sky. Clayton moved fast. Faster than they expected. But when he reached the control surfaces, something snagged at him. Not a sight, not a sound. A feeling. He trusted that feeling. Ignoring the list, he crouched low, flashlight sweeping under the rudder assembly. His gut twisted. A thin fracture, almost invisible, spider-webbed along a critical joint. One wrong maneuver in mid-air, one sudden wind shear, and the entire rudder could shear off. Fatal. The clipboard said nothing about it. The protocol said to move on. Clayton lowered the light, heart hammering in his chest. He could just sign off and walk away. Nobody would blame him. Nobody would even know, except the ones who wouldn't survive the flight. He made his choice. "Where's your chief technician?" Clayton barked when he stormed back down the steps. The silver-haired man turned, already frowning. "What is it?" "Wait, I need authorization to disassemble part of the rudder system. Immediate." The man's face darkened. "You are not authorized to touch. Then find someone who is, or this plane isn't flying." Murmurs rippled through the group. Phones were lifted. Messages shot back and forth. But no one moved. Minutes ticked by, and still no chief. No authorization. No action. Clayton cursed under his breath. He could almost see it. The headlines flashing across news screens, the wreckage smoldering, the precious names on the manifest. He wasn't about to let that happen. Without another word, Clayton climbed back up the steps and got to work. He had one wrench, two hands, and not a shred of permission. Sometimes that was all a man needed. Clayton's hands moved with a rhythm born of instinct, unbolting the access panels, peeling back the sleek layers of polished luxury to get to the raw machinery beneath. Behind him, footsteps thudded up the stairs. "Stop what you're doing immediately!" A younger man in an expensive jacket barked. His badge said Operations Manager, but Clayton barely spared him a glance. "There's a hairline fracture in the rudder linkage," Clayton said, voice low and firm. "If this plane takes off, it won't stay in the sky." "You have no authority here," the man insisted, growing red-faced. "You're liable for damages." Clayton yanked out the cracked joint and tossed it onto the seat beside him. The crack was visible now, lit clearly under the fluorescent cabin lights, a grim black vein splitting the metal. The younger man's mouth snapped shut. "You want to fly her like this?" Clayton asked, voice cold. "Be my guest. Maybe you can ride the wreckage all the way down." For a long moment, the man just stood there, chest heaving, indecision flickering across his face. Then he turned and disappeared down the steps, muttering into his phone. Clayton exhaled slowly. His heart was pounding harder than it should have been. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to matter in places like this. But machines didn't care about pedigree. They cared about hands that could listen. By the time he replaced the faulty part, cannibalized from a backup plane with identical specifications, the sky outside was paling to the soft gray of pre-dawn. His back ached. His fingers were numb. He finished the emergency repairs, triple-checked the system, and finally allowed himself to slump into one of the cabin seats, just for a second. Breathing. Letting the adrenaline leak out of his muscles. That's when he saw her, standing at the foot of the stairs, watching him through the open hatch. Was Delaney Carter herself. No entourage, no bodyguards, no camera flashes, just a woman in a dark coat, arms folded, her expression unreadable. Clayton stood, rubbing his hands on his jeans out of habit, and climbed down the stairs. He expected her to speak first, to bark a demand, to launch into some tirade about schedule delays and liabilities. Instead, she said quietly, "You saved my life tonight, didn't you?" He hesitated. Maybe, maybe not. Hard to say. But I wouldn't have let that plane leave the ground with a crack like that. She studied him. Not the way her assistants had, looking for weaknesses, but in a way that felt heavier. Like she was weighing something deeper. "You didn't have authorization to touch my plane. I know. You disobeyed direct orders from my staff. I know." She tilted her head slightly. "Why?" Clayton shrugged. "Because it was the right thing to do." A small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "You're not like the others," she said. Clayton said nothing. He didn't know what to say to someone like her. Delaney stepped closer, close enough that he could see the tiny lines at the corners of her eyes, the faint signs of exhaustion she hid so well from the cameras. "I want you to stay," she said. He frowned. "Stay?" "With my company. As part of my personal maintenance team. You'll be paid well." "Very well." Clayton hesitated. He thought of his quiet garage back home, the steady, simple life he'd built, the greasy tools, the smell of burnt coffee, the silence no one ever interrupted. And yet, standing here, under the roar of awakening engines and the buzz of urgent voices, something stirred inside him, an itch he hadn't felt in years, a chance. Still, he shook his head. "I'm not looking for more money. I'm not looking for anything." Delaney's eyes gleamed, sharp, calculating, but also amused. "Maybe not," she said. "But sometimes what you're looking for isn't the same as what you need." She handed him a business card, plain, heavy, embossed with nothing but her name and a private number. "Think about it, Clayton Reese," she said, voice low. "Call me when you're ready to stop hiding." Then she turned and disappeared into the growing hum of the airfield, leaving him standing alone, a scrap of heavy paper burning in his hand. Back in his truck, Clayton sat for a long time, card balanced on the dashboard, fingers tapping nervously on the steering wheel. The sky was bleeding from gray into pink, a slow, stubborn sunrise. He thought about her words, about the crack in the plane, about how close life could skate to disaster without anyone even noticing. He wasn't part of her world, and yet, for the first time in a long while, he wasn't sure if he wanted to stay in his own. Clayton Reese had barely made it up the crumbling steps of his porch when he realized he wasn't alone. 2 black cars sat at the curb, engines idling in the early dawn light. Men in dark suits leaned against them, arms crossed, faces unreadable. They didn't belong here. Not among the rusted mailboxes and overgrown yards. Clayton set his toolbox down slowly. "So, Mr. Reese," one of them called, stepping forward. His shoes crunched gravel. His smile didn't touch his eyes. "We'd like a word." Clayton stayed where he was. "Who's we?" "Concerned parties." The man flicked his wrist, and suddenly a slim leather wallet appeared, flashing an ID too quickly to read. "Private security. Working for Carter Aviation." Clayton said nothing. He could feel the weariness settling into his bones, heavy and cold. What do you want?" "You caused quite a stir tonight," the man said, voice smooth. "There are protocols for a reason. Chain of command. Liability." "I fixed a plane," Clayton said flatly. "Saved lives." "So that's one way to look at it?" The man stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Another way to look at it is, you cost powerful people a lot of money, delays, lost opportunities, embarrassment." Behind him, one of the other men opened the door of a car, revealing a briefcase resting on the back seat. "We're authorized to offer you a settlement," the man said. "Sign a few papers, agree not to speak about tonight's events, and you'll be fairly compensated." "And if I don't?" Clayton asked. The man's smile grew colder. "Then things might get complicated. Employment opportunities could dry up. Licenses might be re-examined. Life gets harder." Clayton looked past him, down the empty street, across the sagging porches and cracked sidewalks. No witnesses, no allies. He thought about the card still burning a hole in his jacket pocket, about the woman who had looked him in the eye and seen something the others hadn't. And for the first time in years, Clayton Reese chose to push back. "Tell your bosses," he said quietly, "that I don't scare easy." The man's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing more. He turned on his heel, signaled to the others, and within moments, the black cars pulled away, tires hissing over the broken pavement. Clayton stood there until the taillights disappeared. Then he picked up his toolbox, went inside, and locked the door behind him. The house smelled like machine oil and old wood. A battered coffee pot sputtered in the corner, forgotten. Clayton sat at the kitchen table, staring at Delaney Carter's business card. He ran a thumb over the raised letters, feeling the weight of it. A part of him screamed to throw it away, to vanish back into the obscurity he knew so well. But another part, a deeper, angrier part, refused. They had tried to buy his silence. They had tried to scare him. They had treated him like a problem to be erased. And Delaney Carter had treated him like a man. He owed it to himself to see what came next. Clayton picked up the old landline phone, a clunky relic that barely worked, and dialed the number on the card. It rang once, twice, 3 times, and then, without warning, she answered. "Clayton Reese," Delaney's voice said, crisp and direct. "I was wondering when you'd call." They met later that afternoon, not in some towering office or private lounge, but in a tiny diner 2 towns over, where the coffee was burnt and the waitresses called everyone honey. Delaney sat in a booth by the window, a plain black jacket draped over her chair. No security detail, no assistants, just her. When Clayton slid into the booth across from her, she looked up and smiled. Not the polished, political smile of magazine covers, but something smaller, realer. "You've made some enemies," she said without preamble. "Not the first time," Clayton replied. Delaney nodded, wrapping slender fingers around a chipped coffee mug. "You were right to fix the plane," she said. "But you embarrassed some powerful people. They don't forgive easily." "I noticed," Clayton said dryly. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "You have a choice to make," she said. "You can walk away, fade back into the background. No shame in it. They'll leave you alone eventually. And the other option? You come with me." Clayton raised an eyebrow. "Doing what?" Delaney smiled slightly. "Whatever you want," he snorted. "Not much use for a broke mechanic in your world." "You're wrong," she said softly. "People like you are exactly what's missing. People who fix things without asking for permission." She hesitated, then added, almost as if confessing, "People who don't lie." Clayton looked at her then, really looked. He saw the exhaustion behind her eyes, the brittle armor, the loneliness, and he understood. This wasn't just about engines and rivets. It was about survival, about building something real in a world that valued only appearances. He set his jaw. "What's the catch?" Delaney shook her head. "No catch, no contracts. You stay as long as you want. You leave when you want." A waitress appeared, refilling their coffee. Neither of them touched it. Clayton leaned back, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. Freedom was a funny thing. Everyone talked about it, but few really understood the price. He knew the cost, and he was finally ready to pay it. Clayton extended his hand across the table. Delaney took it without hesitation. No contracts, no promises, just a handshake, just trust. Something rare, something priceless, something worth fighting for. The first time Clayton Reese walked into the headquarters of Carter Aviation, he felt like a man stepping into a different planet. Polished marble floors stretched out beneath ceilings so high they seemed to scrape the clouds. Glass walls gleamed, reflecting cold sunlight. Men and women in tailored suits moved with clipped efficiency, their eyes flicking past him like he was invisible. He carried no briefcase, wore no suit, just jeans, work boots, and a worn jacket. Still, he moved forward. Delaney met him in the lobby herself, a small but unmistakable show of force. If anyone wondered why the Queen of the Empire was greeting a mechanic personally, they didn't show it, at least not openly. She led him through long corridors, past glass offices where high-ranking executives pretended not to stare. "You're not here to play politics," she said quietly as they walked. "You're here to keep me alive." "Sounds simple enough," Clayton muttered. She smiled without humor. "Nothing about my life is simple." They stopped at a door near the end of the hall. A small plaque read, "Special Projects Division." Inside was a workshop unlike anything Clayton had ever seen. State-of-the-art tools, prototype engines, designs so advanced they looked almost alien. "This is your domain," Delaney said. You'll oversee inspections on all my personal aircraft, upgrades, emergency repairs. And your people are fine with that? He asked, glancing around. Her expression darkened. They'll adapt. Clayton wasn't so sure. He could already feel the weight of a dozen unseen eyes tracking his every move. His first week was a lesson in silent warfare. Tools went missing from his bench. Instructions he gave to the junior mechanics were quietly overridden. Work orders disappeared from the system, only to resurface hours later, altered and incomplete. It wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious, but it was constant. At first, Clayton thought it was simple resentment, outsider syndrome, the new guy getting hazed. But as the days wore on, he began to notice something else. The engineers and technicians weren't just defensive. They were scared. Twice he caught hushed conversations cut off mid-sentence when he entered a room. Files slammed shut. Eyes averted. And always, the feeling that someone was waiting for him to slip up. Delaney noticed, of course. She summoned him to her private office late one evening, the city lights sprawling out behind her like a sea of fire. "You're making waves," she said, without looking up from her paperwork. "Wasn't trying to," Clayton said, settling into the chair opposite her. "You don't have to try. Just being here is enough." He frowned. "Why?" Delaney set her pen down, finally meeting his eyes. "Because they know you can't be bought," she said simply. "And that terrifies them." Clayton leaned back, considering that. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't trying to start a revolution. He just wanted to fix things, to do the job right. But in a place built on deals, secrets, and quiet compromises, sometimes doing the right thing was the most dangerous act of all. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. Clayton was running a systems check on Delaney's personal jet, the same one he had saved that night, when he found something he couldn't ignore. A maintenance log had been falsified. According to the records, a crucial component had been replaced 2 months ago. But when Clayton opened the panel himself, he found the original part still installed, corroded, dangerously close to failure. His stomach turned. It wasn't just negligence. It was deliberate. Someone had signed off on a lie. Someone had risked Delaney's life. He photographed the part, documented everything. And then, heart hammering in his chest, he marched straight to Delaney's office. She listened in silence as he laid out the evidence. When he finished, she sat very still for a long moment, fingers steepled beneath her chin. Then she said very quietly, "I knew it would come to this." "You knew someone was trying to sabotage you?" Clayton asked, stunned. "I suspected," she said, "but I needed proof. And I needed someone I could trust to find it." "You used me as bait," Clayton said, realization sinking in. Delaney didn't deny it. "You were the only one they wouldn't expect. The only one they couldn't predict." Clayton rubbed his face, anger and admiration warring inside him. "You realize they're not going to back off now," he said. "They're going to come after you. And me." Delaney's smile was thin and sharp. "Let them try." That night, Clayton sat alone in the workshop, staring at the broken part laid out on the bench before him. He thought about the life he had left behind, the quiet garage, the simple problems, the easy, tired days. He could walk away, still, pretend none of this had ever happened. But as he watched the city lights flicker outside the window, he realized something. He didn't want to. For the first time in his life, he was standing for something that mattered. Not for money, not for survival, but because it was right. And whatever came next, he wasn't going to back down. Not now, not ever. The first threat came 2 nights later. Clayton was in the hangar, finalizing a stress test on a modified wing structure, when he noticed the flicker of movement beyond the far windows. At first, he thought it was nothing, a trick of tired eyes and restless shadows. But then a spark, unmistakable, and flared in the darkness. Someone was cutting through the outer fence. He moved without thinking, sliding a heavy wrench into his hand, heart thudding like a war drum. No alarms, no cameras reacting, which meant the security system had been compromised from inside. The realization hit like a punch. This wasn't random vandalism, it was a message. He stepped into the open, every sense sharpened to a painful edge. Two figures in dark clothing slipped through the gap in the fence, moving fast and low. Professional, one headed for the main hangar doors, the other toward the fuel storage. Clayton cursed under his breath. If they ignited the fuel tanks, it wouldn't just be property damage. It would be a death sentence for anyone nearby, including him. He didn't hesitate. Clayton sprinted across the concrete, boots slamming hard enough to echo through the night. The first intruder saw him coming and broke into a dead run, tossing something over his shoulder. A small metallic glint. Instinct screamed. Clayton dove to the ground just as the device exploded behind him. A sharp concussion of light and smoke. Not lethal, not meant to kill, just to blind, to cover their tracks. By the time he staggered to his feet, coughing and blinking against the after-images, they were gone, vanished back into the night. But the message had been delivered. Next time, it might not be a smoke bomb. Next time, they might not miss. Delaney arrived less than an hour later. No bodyguards this time, no entourage. Just her, in jeans and a plain jacket, hair tied back. When she stepped out of her car and saw the damaged fence, the scorch marks, the lingering haze in the air, something changed in her face. A hardening, a tightening around the mouth. She didn't ask questions. She didn't waste words. She simply looked at Clayton, her expression grim. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "Nothing permanent," he said, voice rough from the smoke. She nodded once. "Come with me." They drove in silence, the city bleeding away behind them, out past the suburbs, into the open country, where the stars burned cold and sharp overhead. Finally, Delaney pulled off the road onto a gravel turnout, killed the engine, and sat back in her seat. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then she said, almost too quietly, "You can still walk away, you know." Clayton turned to look at her. The moonlight caught the edge of her profile. Strong jaw, high cheekbones, eyes like a storm barely held in check. "Is that what you want?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "No. But I won't ask you to stay if it's going to get you killed." Clayton leaned back, staring out at the empty fields stretching into darkness. "Life was killing me already," he said finally. "Just slower." Delaney let out a breath, half laugh, half sigh. "You're a stubborn man, Clayton Reese." "Maybe." She turned toward him, expression shifting, softening in a way he hadn't seen before. "You have no idea how rare that is," she said. "Someone who doesn't flinch, someone who doesn't compromise." He shrugged, uncomfortable under the weight of her gaze. "I'm just doing what I know." "And that's enough," Delaney said. For a moment, the silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was warm, alive. Clayton felt the pull. Sharp, dangerous, undeniable. He could have leaned in, could have crossed that final fragile line. But instead, he said, "We should get back." Delaney smiled, a slow, real smile. "Yeah," she said, "we should." But neither of them moved for a long, long time. Back at Carter Aviation, the security was doubled. New cameras, new protocols, new guards. Ones Delaney handpicked herself. Still, the attacks didn't stop. Anonymous threats, sabotaged equipment, a near miss with a rigged hydraulic line that could have crushed Clayton's hand. Every day became a battle, and every night he found himself drawn closer to Delaney. Not because she was rich, not because she was powerful, because she refused to bend. Because somewhere, beneath all the steel and ambition, she was just as tired of fighting alone as he was. One night, as they worked side by side in the hangar, checking a newly retrofitted wing assembly, Delaney glanced up and caught him looking at her. Not in the way the others looked, calculating, assessing, just looking, seeing. "What is it?" she asked. Clayton hesitated. Then, without thinking, he said, "You don't have to do this alone." For a second, just a heartbeat. Something raw flashed across her face. Then she masked it, busying herself with a clipboard. But her voice, when she spoke, was softer. "Neither do you." They didn't talk about it again. Not in words, but from that night on, something shifted between them. Silent, steady, as inevitable as gravity. Two people, two broken pieces, starting to fit together in the only way they knew how. Through action, not promises. Through loyalty, not declarations. Through heart and steel. Clayton Reese found the final piece of the puzzle on a cold, brittle morning just before sunrise. He was reviewing diagnostic logs in the private maintenance system, something he had learned to double-check personally, when he spotted the anomaly. A set of maintenance approvals signed off under his name. Only he hadn't been near that aircraft. Someone was forging his credentials. And it wasn't just sloppy work. It was a trap. A deliberate setup to frame him for negligence, to ruin his reputation, maybe even to implicate him in sabotage. His pulse stayed steady as he traced the edits. Security logs, entry badges, surveillance blind spots. All signs pointed back to one name: Harris Monroe, the vice president of aviation operations. The same man who had first handed Clayton the checklist that night, ordering him not to look too closely. The same man who had everything to lose if Delaney truly cleaned house. It all fit, too neatly. Clayton sat back in his chair, staring at the screen. He could take this to Delaney. He could expose Harris. But he knew it wouldn't end there. The kind of man Harris was, he wouldn't go quietly. He wouldn't be the only one dragged down. There would be fallout, broken alliances, blood in the water. Delaney's empire, everything she had built, might not survive the blow. The choice was simple: destroy the corruption, or protect her. He found Delaney in the hangar. She was standing alone by the nose of her jet, hands tucked into the pockets of her leather jacket, staring out at the coming sunrise. When he approached, she didn't turn around. "I heard you found something," she said quietly. "Yeah," Clayton said, "I did." The silence between them stretched thin, almost vibrating with what wasn't being said. Finally, Delaney faced him. There were dark circles under her eyes, strain in the tightness of her jaw. But her voice was steady. "Tell me." Clayton held her gaze. "If I do, everything changes," he said. "There's no putting it back." Delaney's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "It already changed the night you showed up." He exhaled slowly and told her everything. For a long time after he finished, Delaney said nothing. She just stood there, weighing the cost of the truth. Finally, she asked, "What would you do, Clayton?" He hesitated, then said, "Fight. Clean it out, no matter what it costs." A flicker of pain crossed her face. Not for herself, but for all the people who would be hurt. For the ones who trusted her. For the ones who didn't deserve the fallout. "I'm tired of pretending," she said at last. He stepped closer, close enough that he could see the small scar above her eyebrow. A detail never captured in glossy photos. "Me too," he said. Delaney nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Then we do this together." The confrontation wasn't theatrical. No shouting matches in crowded halls, no explosive scenes, just a closed-door meeting with Harris. Evidence laid out on the table like a blade. He tried to bluster, to threaten, to offer bribes. Clayton watched silently as Delaney dismantled him with calm, surgical precision. When Harris finally realized there was no escape, he lashed out the only way cowards knew how. "You'll never survive this," he hissed. "You think the board will let you gut the company from the inside? They'll turn on you. You'll be finished." Delaney didn't flinch. "Maybe," she said, "but I'd rather fall for telling the truth than stand on a lie." Harris left the building under guard, his security clearance revoked, his empire of quiet corruption crumbling behind him. It was done. But the real battle was just beginning. The fallout hit within hours. The board called emergency meetings. Shares fluctuated. Rumors ran wild. Panic rippled through the sleek glass offices, and through it all, Delaney stood firm, refusing to issue sanitized statements or empty reassurances. She told the truth. She trusted the strength of what she had built, not on deceit, but on resilience. And at her side, silent and steady, was Clayton. They sat together that night on the roof of the maintenance hangar, legs dangling over the edge, watching the city flicker and pulse far below. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Delaney said, "You could still walk away." Clayton shook his head. "I don't run," he said simply. She smiled, small, real, a little broken. "You don't know what life with me would look like," she said. "It's not easy. So nothing worth having ever is." Delaney turned to him, serious now. "You're not here because of what I can give you," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a confirmation. "No," Clayton said. "I'm here because, for the first time, someone saw me. He wasn't a tool, wasn't a background fixture. He was seen, known, and loved. Maybe not with flowery words, but with the kind of loyalty that needed no explanation." Delaney reached out, fingers brushing his hand, tentative. Clayton caught her hand and held it tightly. No grand speeches, no declarations, just two broken people choosing each other, clear-eyed and unafraid. They didn't marry in a cathedral. There were no press releases or headlines. Just a quiet morning months later, in a courthouse no one noticed, with two witnesses who barely looked up from their phones. No rings, no elaborate vows, just a simple promise. "I see you. I choose you. I stand with you." And in the end, that was more than enough.